The Professors is brought to you by Blackborder.com, an MTG site that delves heavily into every format of Magic, drafting with the pros, constructed testing, and deck design with the high-level mages, some of the best stories of the game, as well as Rise of the Eldrazi boxes, cases, intro packs, and more. So support the show and go check out Blackborder.com today.
They made a statue of us.
Hello everybody and welcome to yet another episode of The Professors. This week we'll take a final look at the economics of the increasingly expensive mythic rares being released more often, including Rise of the Eldrazi's 90% higher than Worldwake mythic mean, as well as a look at the RotE sealed pool I rolled at the pre-release, how I built it, the effects of RotE's incredibly slow cards on standard, and a new exciting visual segment of the show. So let's draw. This segment is an extension from the first segment of episode 114. If you haven't seen it yet, you might want to click on the link in the information bar below for the base story and numerics of this subject. Remember when we found out BS Angel was being printed? Yeah, me too. It was obvious to the player base that the card obsoleted Sarah Angel. Wizards of the Coast couldn't deny that. +1/+1, first strike, lifelink, protection from dragons, and protection from demons were all ultimately useful abilities that topped having the somewhat penultimate ability of Vigilance. And yet, the reason Metaslayer Angel will always be remembered is because it had this new, fiery, maliciously emboldened logo. Because you could only find one in every 120 packs of Magic 2010. And this is where our financial tale begins. Numerous writers in Magic hypothesize every week about why certain cards will cost more or less. It's quite complex with the economy of foils, premiums, restrictive access to cards, and base of what decks are cheaper to build. Other than that, though, the cards in competitive decks cost more, the ones in casual ones cost slightly or dramatically less, and of course you can acquire the random shaft for 5 cents from the dealers and can sell them back for 1/10 of a cent. Of course, Magic wasn't always like this, and even the creator of the game, Richard Garfield, has said that he never wanted a single card to sell for over $20 a piece, unless it was because the card was foiled, a premium edition, or had special artwork. $75 for a playset? Doesn't sound so bad when a playset of Bankslayers is over 3 times that. Obviously, Dr. Garfield's ideals did not hold strong. Black Lotus went over $20 a piece in a few weeks before many of the game's original players knew it existed. In economic terms, this happened simply because the supply went down and the demand went up. Such cases happen today, but on much larger scales. Where there are under 20,000 copies of Beta Edition Black Lotuses, there are tens of millions of copies of Player Slayer Angels. However, where the number of Wallet Slayer Angels is thousands of times larger than the number of Lotuses, and yet the demand of Slay Slayer Angel is gauged to be, according to sales over the last 2 months across Blackborder.com, StarCityGames.com, and ChannelFireball.com, less than 100 times that of a Beta Edition Black Lotus, therefore Slayer should sell for about $24. However, the card has already climbed to a stammering $65 on StarCityGames.com, $14 cheaper on Blackborder.com. But why? Why are we forced to pay 2.5 times the price of what a card should be marked at for that card? The answer is just above the supply-demand inverse proportion. Hype and controlled market. By seeing how much the card is being played, lots of people with 4 copies of Slay Banners sleeved up in their mythic deck, and another 4 copies of John Boehner sitting in their binders will want to keep their copies to speculate on the card and see what the peak is before pawning it off for a healthy amount. Second, when people see how much better the card is than another Angel of the same casting cost and in the same set, they feel the need to collect or play it over the crappier one. Just by the writing of the name by an influential player, or say a show with thousands of views, saying the name Baneslayer Angel can send a card with such a high price point and demand level up in value. Before attending the pre-release, I remember calling the format as not only the slowest format, but the most skill-intensive sealed format ever. And while my communication this past week was limited to the internet more than my communication to the outside world whilst editing normally is due to being away from the computer some days and being away from actually playing Magic the Others, I've done my best to keep on top of the community's macro developments in Rise of the Eldrazi Limited. If Magic was a person and talking to it were the equivalent to looking at a meta-statistical analysis, my attempts to communicate it in the last week, whether over Facebook, texting, Morse code, or telegram delivery by way of an in-between of someone mandating a restraining order on someone and the other person having the restraining order placed on them, the ways of communication were ineffective, and the reason there was no show, likewise. But anyway, the format is the most complicated and skill-intensive ever. In fact, I'm honestly having trouble making sense of it. So I wanted to just ask your opinion of the format, and how you would shape up my sealed pool from the pre-release. Next week, I'll discuss my choice for the best. Oh, and the prize? Why, this is of course the fourth, usually tri-monthly sealed deck building contest, so we've got a big prize. So while I don't plan to play out the top 4 builds, being that this isn't the usual sealed season, I am going to pick one big prize winner to get 117 mythic rares and rares, including 17 mythic rares, in honor of episode 117. Among them, one promo Emrakul for Johnny, the monolithic Progenitus for Timmy, and the still rather pricey Lotus Cobra for Spike. The contest ends next week on Wednesday at 11:59 p.m. EST. You can submit via blackborder.com or send an email to apalm9292@yahoo.com. Let's take a look at the sealed pool, and good luck.
They made a statue of us and put it on a mountaintop. Now tourists come and stare at us, blow bubbles with their gum, take photographs of fun, have fun.
Before RotE came to Standard, I was sure of one thing. I was sure that, while a lot of cards from the set wouldn't affect Type 2 immediately, the concept of the set itself would morph the format. This would be pretty much the first time the ideas behind a set would take precedence over the set's contents, but for the first time, I believe they did. For months now, Jund has dominated nearly 40% of top 8s, even despite being 30% or less of the field. It's also taken nearly 45% of the first place trophies since Worldwake was released. But, for once, we see the deck, the good old blue-white control deck, as having a chance. And sure, Wall of Omens and Gideon Jura being 7 of the 60 cards in the deck is big, but the fact that Jund has decreased to less than 20% and has entirely changed their tune to play to battle against the control deck that moves a turn slower but with much better card advantage proves the ideology theory for Rise of the Eldrazi. Sure, the format wasn't like, set gets introduced, everyone plays a colorless deck, but it forced all the deck builders to think about it. As for the actual blue-white deck this theme eventually resulted in, Wall of Omens and the deck's addition of red was a major addition to Patrick Chapin's original blue-white control list we saw at Pro Tour San Diego. While it does have some of the control elements with the board sweep of Martial Coup and spot removal of Path to Exile on Oblivion Ring, which works on Emrakul by the way, the deck has 3 times as many Planeswalkers as the usual pre-Rise of the Eldrazi builds, which ran only the 4 Jace 2.0s. The deck has also swapped out the lowly, cute trick of Halimar Depths for action lands like fetches that also fix your mana and tech edges. Interestingly though, the deck doesn't need the countering magic of the subpar counterspell Cancel, and it refuses to use a conditional counterspell like Essence Scatter. But it's willing to put its 3 drops towards the draw spell we've always seen as subpar, Divination. And in testing, while I'd much prefer playing Sea Beyond, even if it does work as a functional 3-drop because of the other 8 2-drops, Divination is a plain sorcery that simply is the double cantrip the conglomerate of Planeswalkers needs. However, where Divination is only 2 cantrips for 3, Wall of Omens and Spreading Seas prove to be effectively 0/4 walls and island traps for 1 colored mana respectively, with a 1 colorless cantrip attached. These cards further slow the game state and let you wait for the Planeswalkers against Jund especially, as well as the Vampires and Mono-Red Burn effectively. 2 antithesis archetypes for the red-blue-white Planeswalker build. Against the current metagame, though, what would I advise you to play? The answer is certainly not Jund. It's still being hated against, with most decks having half their sideboard for it, and up to 8 main deck cards, whose function is only viable against Jund. I wouldn't suggest playing Mythic or Mythic Conscription either. The deck's retail values are nearly $600, and while the addition to Mythic Conscription of Sovereigns of Alara alongside Eldrazi Conscription is Johnny-tastic and drops the deck's price by roughly $100, the nature of random mana birds getting you to big creatures pales in comparison to the 12 Planeswalkers and 13 different Planeswalker abilities in the deck. This brings us to the conclusion that, according to the PTQs for May 2nd and the Star City Atlanta 5K, that Super Friends is the deck to play. At Grand Prix Washington, D.C., I plan to be rocking it, pretty much purely because of the number of options and chances to outplay your opponent it offers. Question now is, though, will this version of Justice Control become the new Jund? That is to say, will it become 40% of the metagame or have 3 copies in every tournament top 8? Fortunately, due to the pricing and number of mythics in the deck, this will never be the case for taking up the 40% of the metagame part. However, is it good enough to make it to becoming 3/8 of the top 8s? Well, the question now is, can it beat the hate? Will it later stand against Vampires and Mono-Red, 2 decks with better matchups against this deck, and which were underrepresented in Atlanta? Let me know your thoughts. And until next time, this is Anthony Palmario. On behalf of the Professors, we're tapped out for now, but we'll untap soon.